In this episode, we're going to be asking whether our current AI systems are capable of creating something entirely original. The AI Academia podcast is a weekly show helping educators like you leverage AI in your everyday practice. I'm your host, Andy Fisher, and thanks for joining me. Some of my happiest memories of my own days at school were double periods spent in the art studio as part of my A-level studies. While I wouldn't describe myself as a good artist, I've kept my hand in and I often sketch. I've worked semi-professionally as a photographer, which formed part of my degree course back in the mid-90s. I write poetry. I've dabbled in printmaking and have even been known to sing in the shower. The point being, I'd like to think of myself as a creative person, and I'm at my most engaged when I'm innovating. So when I started experimenting with generative AI a couple of years ago now, I had really mixed feelings about the process. On the one hand, it was really exciting to see that in just a few seconds, I could create something that was superior to anything I had the technical ability to generate. But on the other hand, it felt somewhat like I was cheating, and I didn't have the same degree of investment in the output as I did with something that I've crafted with my own hands, and perhaps you feel the same. For a while, I've been wanting to put a podcast episode together exploring this question around artificial intelligence and creativity. It's such a huge topic that I have struggled for a while to find a shape and a direction, but I've landed on 4 topics that I'd like to focus on today. The first is the question of what we mean by creativity. Can a machine be truly creative? The second is to try and determine if there's a difference between human creativity and the potential for machines to create. Third, I'm going to be exploring the question of whether AI threatens to displace human beings as creatives. And then finally, I'm going to end by looking at some practical ways that we as teachers and our students can harness AI to boost our creativity in our classrooms and in our lessons. So let's begin by looking at what we mean by creativity. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to move back and forth between creativity with a capital C, which might refer to the fine arts, for example, and creativity with a small c, such as coming up with a solution to an engineering problem or thinking of new ways to encourage students to read more consistently. And talking of reading, I've read books and blog posts about creativity for a long time now. I'm interested in creative breakthroughs, ways in which we can create the conditions for our creative juices to flow, and how we can overcome the barriers we have to having new and original ideas. And what I've kept coming across again and again is that creativity seems to be the ability to generate something which is new, but also something which is useful. It's a combination of innovation and utility. The sources I've read tend to present creativity as a process of breaking free from conventional patterns in order to arrive at unexpected places, connections, solutions. It's often described as the drive to explore the unknown or to transcend barriers. It's a 10-letter word with at least as many different definitions, and that's part of the challenge of determining if an AI system is capable of meeting these same benchmarks for being creative. As I've read more widely around the strategies employed by the most creative people in society, 2 distinct patterns or workflows have emerged. One approach says that to be a creative, you just need to put the work in. You need to prime the pump. To have a good idea, you need to have lots of ideas. You have to be fearless in iterating again and again, and then be ruthless in throwing out all but the best ideas that emerge. And this is very similar to the process of brute forcing a solution using AI systems. One of the breakthrough moments in AI advancement came in 1997 when Garry Kasparov, chess grandmaster, lost to IBM's Deep Blue, a chess engine with access to huge data sets, which was able to analyze thousands of positions before selecting its next move. it was able to brute force its way to a win by doing what great chess players do, that is, thinking multiple moves ahead based on pre-ingested board positions, but it did it better. Similarly, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry last year was awarded to the developers of AlphaFold AI, which is a 3D protein folding simulator which has the potential to revolutionize new drug discoveries. By predicting the shape of protein structures and their potential binding sites, it can anticipate candidates deserving of further medical research. In fact, the first new class of antibiotics to come to the market in over 60 years, which is effective against MRSA, was discovered using AI systems. They're so successful because these models can run millions of simulations in the time it would take a human researcher to test just one viable candidate in a laboratory, and it can do so at a fraction of the cost. We can say then definitively that artificial intelligence has created a new medicine with real-world value. But is that all there is to the mysteries of creativity? What about that other process by which humans create? This one is not the result of working your craft day in, day out, but involves those strange intuitive leaps, those moments of insight, those eureka experiences which leave our best neuroscientists baffled. We suspect that it involves subconscious processing of some kind, but our experience is that a solution to a problem pops into our imagination fully formed. We might be out for a brisk walk, soaking in a bath, or doodling in a margin when, boom, the muse lands in our lap and we're gifted with a sparkling brand new idea. There are lots of examples in history of this kind of creative breakthrough. We can even create in our sleep. Elias Howe's invention of the sewing machine in the mid-1800s came from a dream when he was being chased by natives who had holes in the tips of their spears. This led him to understand, upon awakening, that the thread could be introduced into the tip rather than the head of the needle. Similarly, Auguste Kekule in 1861 was struggling to try and understand the structure of benzene when he fell asleep and dreamed of a snake biting its own tail, and then realised that it was a ring structure. Surely these kinds of moments are uniquely human, perhaps even divinely gifted. After all, the root of the word inspiration, spiratus, means to be breathed into, to be filled with life and ideas by the gods. Well, perhaps not. We only need to look as far as another game where a machine beat a human being to challenge this paradigm. In 2016, AlphaGo, born from the same Google lab which would produce AlphaFold a few years later, beat Grandmaster Lee Sedol with its famous Move 37. If you're not familiar with Go, it's sometimes referred to as Chinese checkers. It's a highly complex game. There are more board positions than there are atoms in the observable universe. And when AlphaGo performed Move 37, the observers of that game described it as beautiful. They said that it overturned hundreds of years of received wisdom, that it was counterintuitive, indeed creative. Sedol was so shaken by the move that he left the auditorium where the match was taking place for 20 minutes, and those overseeing the AlphaGo model were sure it had made an error. The brilliance of the move only emerged later in the game as it capitalized on the board position that pivotal moment created. Was this just another example of brute force, or could it be more aptly described as an example of an emergent property which was not foreseen by those who programmed the system, an original idea, a silicon-based flash of inspiration? Some interesting research around creativity was carried out by Humboldt University Berlin in conjunction with the University of Essex last year on something called the AUT, or Alternative Uses Test. The test used large language models to evaluate divergent thinking. This involved asking people and large language models to come up with as many different uses for a mundane object as they could in a constrained time period. So subjects might be asked to list as many alternative uses for a paperclip, or a paintbrush, or an ice cube tray in 1 minute. So let's have a bit of fun and carry out an n=1 experiment. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to come up with as many creative and interesting uses for a roll of dental floss as you can, and then we'll compare your answers to ChatGPT. Ready? And go. So how did you do? Did you come up with 5? 10? Did you start running out of steam halfway through? Or did your best ideas emerge towards the end of the process? What was your best alternative use for dental floss? And how would you rate your output as a creative? When I put this challenge to ChatGPT 4.0, it spat out a list of 50 answers in under 10 seconds. And before we hang our heads in shame as failed apes with an overinflated sense of our own potential, we should acknowledge that this kind of creative task is exactly playing to an AI's strength. It's trained on massive data sets, so it has access to a broader range of information and associations than we have at our disposal. It doesn't get tired, it doesn't get distracted, it doesn't experience self-doubt, and it doesn't critique its output and then self-censor for fear of seeming stupid. It churned out 50 ideas. Half of them weren't very interesting, in my opinion. A few were repetitive. But then there were some really interesting ideas too. It suggested dental floss could serve as a replacement for a shoelace, a fishing line, a clothes line, a way of securing packages, a bracelet, a picture hanging wire, a way of slicing soft cheese, a hair tie, a candle wick, a fire starter, a miniature rope for dolls' houses, puppet strings, a string for a musical instrument, a fake spider's web for Halloween, and a miniature zip line. Not bad for 10 seconds. So does this then prove that ChatGPT 4 is creative? After all, divergent thinking is one of the hallmarks of creativity. Emily Bender would counter with a heartfelt no. In a 2021 paper on large language models, she introduced the term stochastic parroting to explain away this illusion of creative thinking. The term stochastic means probabilistic or based on randomness, while parroting suggests repeating something without real comprehension. So in other words, a GPT model might look like it's reasoning or understanding, but behind the scenes, it's just using probability algorithms to predict the most likely sequence of words based on the patterns in its training data. Bender contends that AI, at least the models we have today, are tethered to imitation. ChatGPT cannot innovate so much as interpolate. It's a neat party trick, but that's all it is. It all comes down to intent. I can remember a few years back there was a lot of interest in elephants such as Suda from Taiwan, who seemed capable of painting. There were YouTube clips of these beautiful creatures with paintbrushes in their trunks, delicately working on canvases to seemingly produce self-portraits. On further investigation, even though elephants are highly intelligent animals who mourn lost family members, they have prestigious memories, this demonstration of art was merely the result of reinforcement learning. The animals were trained through repetition, trial and error, reward and punishment, to be able to replicate the same painting again and again and again. There was nothing inherently creative going on, and sadly, in some cases, the elephants were brutalized if they didn't comply. The point is, many of us were duped because the idea that elephants can paint seems plausible. Our senses and our brains deceive us all the time. We think a cat brushing against our leg is a sign of affection, and maybe it is, but maybe it's just leaving a scent to mark its territory. If a couple on a first date do something that arouses their survival instincts, such as a roller coaster ride or a skydiving experience, they are far more likely to find each other sexually attractive than if they did something more sedate, like shared a meal or went for a walk in the countryside. Psychology textbooks are full of such examples, so perhaps we are just inclined to attribute the potential for creativity to a machine because we see intent where there is only binary data. We humanize the inhuman. We create creators where there are none, just as we see dragons and faces in the clouds. But then one could counter even this argument by asking, is it true that there are uniquely human prerequisites for the creative process, such as intent, frustration, curiosity, or inspiration? Are intent and consciousness necessary conditions for creativity? Or are we just shifting the goalposts here to deny AI systems the keys to our most jealously guarded playground? Or, if we really want to fiddle with the lid of Pandora's box, we might ask if it's possible that we are more like finely tuned Turing machines than we might want to admit. Just because we're not aware of the coding or the programming that's going on underneath our surface doesn't mean that we aren't following similar algorithmic processes in order to arrive at our moments of insight. There are plenty of fields of study that find some uncanny similarities between our minds and the neural networks which form the basis of our AI systems. Brain imaging studies, game theory, Norbert Wiener's early research into cybernetics, natural languaging processing, all draw these same parallels. Perhaps we are creating AI systems in our own likeness, meat machines making silicon offspring. And it's at this point when we have to start questioning the relationship between creativity, free will, and consciousness that we start to run into the limitations of this kind of inquiry. For the time being, we can only conclude that the human brain and the neural networks at the heart of complex AI systems are both black boxes. One is carbon-based, the other silicon. Both display emergent properties that can be unexpected. Both are capable of breathtaking outputs. One is sentient, and it's unclear to what degree our AI counterparts are or are not self-aware. We just don't know. And this leads us quite neatly to ask whether AI systems will displace human creativity, or will they instead come to complement our creative process? Now, perhaps it's just because I'm an optimist, but I'm inclined towards the latter point of view. I think we will learn to use AI systems as tools or collaborators rather than find ourselves mixing paint and sharpening pencils for our robot overlords. There have always been moral panics around the ways in which technological advances will impact creative spaces. When the camera was created in the early 19th century, many artists believed that the photograph would be the death of the canvas. And this was not, of course, the case. In fact, many artists appropriated the camera to augment their own workflows by taking snapshots that they could print and then use at home as studies in their studio. In the same way, when the first electric guitars emerged in California in the 1930s, it didn't spell the death of the acoustic artistry so much as a broadening and enriching of all genres of music that emerged in the following decades. And I think the same thing will be true of the way in which we work with artificial intelligence. Technology will always amplify intention. If our intention is to create, we will be able to do so more quickly, in more interesting ways, and in different ways when we have AI at our disposal. Used congruently, generative AI platforms can democratize the creative process. With limited training and investment, my students have been empowered to create illustrated storybooks, orchestral arrangements, and animated film clips without having to deal with publishers, recording studios, or actors and film sets. Today, if you have a creative vision and are willing to embrace the learning curve that comes with these tools, you can compete with professional artists around the world from your basement, just as Steve Jobs built Apple from his garage back in the 70s. On the other hand, of course, there's the danger that we will soon be trying to navigate marketplaces flooded with homogenized, low-quality creative outputs that are so prolific it'll become hard to find the really worthwhile content from all the dross. Browsing the Amazon Kindle store or YouTube, which has become hijacked by faceless AI-narrated channels, can be depressing. Again, technology amplifies intent. If the intention is to maximize attention, manipulate the algorithm to make money, then AI will serve us up the quagmire that we conjure into being. If we use AI to create deep fakes, photorealistic footage of celebrity affairs or politicians caught in scandals, the same impulse that gave us the Sistine Chapel or Van Gogh's sunflowers will be used to cast us all into a hall of mirrors where it's almost impossible to discern truth from fiction. I don't think it's a coincidence that cultures throughout history have depicted the creative impulse as a flame. The same element that can warm us and protect us from the dark can be used to burn down the world around us. An AI system isn't just a camera or an electric guitar, because each of those tools is domain specific, whereas AI is protean in its potential. It's pure possibility. And this makes it the most exciting and the most terrifying creation we've ever birthed. With this in mind, and in an effort to navigate away from these darker waters, let's briefly return to Garry Kasparov for a moment. When he was defeated by Deep Blue back in 1997, he didn't spend very long licking his wounds before he pivoted to see the potential of the machine that took his crown. A year later, he took part in a new kind of chess tournament in Lyon, Spain, in which he and Veselin Topalov would compete against one another while augmented by their own respective chess engines. Dubbed advanced chess, but now more commonly referred to as Centaur chess, it opened up a whole new field of creative play. In these Centaur matches, a human player uses a computer to model the various moves available given the board position, and then he or she retains strategic oversight and decision-making based on the feedback produced by the AI system. Kasparov and others have shown that an average human player augmented with an average chess engine will consistently outperform a sophisticated supercomputer working without a human in the loop. In my imagination, by the way, I'm now humming Jack Johnson's iconic beach tune, Better When We're Together, or perhaps Bette Midler's Wind Beneath My Wings, or maybe even We Can Work It Out by the Beatles. I'm on a roll. And reading about Kasparov's journey led me to think about how actually in many ways all of us are centaurs. We're all hybrids using AI systems to augment our human interactions and activities. We use GPS to navigate from A to Z. We use mobile phones to project our consciousness to different places and times. And even in the art world, this idea of combining an individual artist's creativity with an industrialized or mechanized process is nothing new. Think about the work of Andy Warhol in the 1960s, for example, with his famous factory, which was populated by a plethora of studio assistants. Warhol would have a concept, an idea, but many of his iconic silk screens with figures like Marilyn Monroe, Jackie Onassis or Chairman Mao were produced by those in his extended creative team. He literally industrialized his process, and he wasn't shy about admitting it. He coined it art by telephone. He confessed that he was excited by the ideas he had, but didn't have the inclination to then carry out the production of his vision. So he outsourced those parts of the creative process that he was not inspired by, while maintaining an oversight and signing the canvases to authenticate them. Canvases, incidentally, which still sell for tens of millions of dollars when they come to market. Would anyone refute that Warhol was not a creative artist? That the works were not his? How is this any different then from you or me prompting Midjourney to create an image or using Suno to record a song to our specifications? We may not be able to state definitively that AI systems are capable of creating original works on their own at this point in history. But the Warhol benchmark, as I've now coined this sniff test, would certainly seem to give us precedent to argue that AI tools can be used to augment human-inspired artifacts and texts. Do I have to really get my hands dirty to be a creative, to be an artist? Or is art and creativity as much a cerebral and intuitive process as it is something which requires hands-on work with tools? With all this in mind, I think probably the direction of travel is that we're going to end up with more and more hybrid creative endeavors alongside traditional creative processes. We'll have an idea and we'll express that idea as a prompt using an AI model or an agent, and it will then execute on that idea and iterate possible outcomes. Then we'll take that content and curate and refine it towards the initial vision that we had. And in fact, this is the kind of process that I now find myself using more and more in my teaching and also in creating this podcast. When I'm producing a thumbnail for a YouTube upload, for example, I'll have a concept. I have an idea in my mind's eye, and I'll use an art generator and a prompt to realize that idea. The thumbnail for this episode, for example, is going to be an image of me as a robot artist in a light-filled studio surrounded by canvases and paints. I'll take that prompt and I'll enhance it using a large language model, and I'll run it through the AI art generator to produce 4 images at a time and see what it comes up with. After each batch of images, I'll modify the prompt to get closer to the kind of thing I have in mind. This might happen quickly, or it might well be that I need to prompt maybe 10 or 15 runs until I land at an image that approximates what I had in my mind's eye. In effect, I'll throw away 95% of the outputs. But once I find something I like, I'll take that version into an editor and I'll do in-painting and out-painting. There'll be parts of the image that I want to change, parts that I want to extend or erase. These adjustments will also be carried out using AI augmented tools. And then finally, I'll download the edited image into Photoshop and I'll play around manually with filters and I'll add text to the thumbnail. This whole process will take anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour or more, depending on how effectively I collaborate with the AI models and how skillfully I prompt and iterate on the first outputs. It requires a mixture of technical knowledge, good prompting, and a clear idea of what I'm trying to achieve. I would argue that this is a creative process. An idea that was only in my mind's eye is manifest in the real world and can be shared with others. I couldn't have produced that outcome, certainly not in the time frame I have available, without the use of these AI models. The AI systems couldn't have produced that image without my guidance and initial inspiration. I suppose I'm working in a way that's somewhere between being a musician and a conductor of an orchestra, which raises an interesting question. If a composer or a conductor is more or less creative than a musician. Similarly, when I'm producing a script for an episode of this podcast, I follow AI augmented workflows. The initial research, scripting and editing of each episode sees me moving back and forth seamlessly from entirely human-operated systems like a word processor, or an audio recorder, and then the use of AI tools like large language models, transcription apps, and editing software. It took a while for me to fine-tune these kind of workflows, but I'm pretty happy with them now. Working as a podcast centaur, not a label I would have expected to use to describe myself, it allows me to significantly reduce the recording and production time so that I'm more likely to be able to maintain a weekly output schedule whilst holding down a full-time job and having quality time with my family. As I mentioned, elements of this same kind of augmented workflow have found their way into my lesson planning, resource creation, in my email correspondence, and in my report writing. I'm sure with a little thought, you can devise your own creative processes that serve your needs too. So, to finish today, I'd like to offer 5 simple prompts that you can use with any large language model like Claude, ChatGPT, or Grok to augment your own creativity in the classroom. The first of the 5 techniques is using AI as a devil's advocate. It's really helpful to be able to find ways of getting outside of your own thinking process to move beyond our assumptions, blind spots, and ideas. You've no doubt already done this by having conversations with friends who might adopt a benevolent but adversarial position to your own. This is the reason why debate is considered such a useful pedagogical tool. It helps us to tease out the nuances of the topic we're learning about by holding an open mind to different positions or readings. You can just invite the chatbot to challenge you on the position you input, or you could request the script for a constructive roundtable discussion on your topic, with speakers holding well-argued but divergent points of view. Next, we can use AI as a brainstorming partner. We can ask it to give us multiple potential ideas for a topic that we're thinking about to provoke our own creative thinking. If preparing for a lesson on magnetism, we might ask for 10 starter activities to grab our learners' attention. Or we might ask for 5 different acronyms for memorising rhetorical devices that our students could use whilst planning a persuasive speech in exam conditions. Third, we can use AI as a mashup tool. These models are excellent at producing unusual blends or remixes of inputs. We might ask it to suggest ways in which the French Revolution can be presented using the format from Strictly Come Dancing. Or we could ask to devise a production of Hamlet inspired by the setting and musical theatre of West Side Story. Many of the outputs from these kinds of prompts will be truly awful, but there'll be some golden nuggets along the way too. Fourth, we can use AI as a constraint generator. Often creativity emerges as a consequence of limitations. Poetry is an obvious example that comes to mind. Writing a poem of precisely 14 lines in iambic pentameter and with a strict rhyme scheme would seem likely to crush creativity, but the inverse is true. Counterintuitively, when we are forced to wrestle with obstructions and restrictions, we think outside the box and come up with novel and interesting new ideas. So, we can invite AI to suggest and recommend some constraints for a lesson activity. I've done a competitive card sorting activity with one member of the team blindfolded, which was a lot of fun. I've also asked pupils to write a short summary of a text we've studied and randomly assigned constraint cards. One pupil can't use the letter T at any point in their writing. Another had to make sure that each new sentence began with sequential letters in the alphabet. And then their teammates had to guess what constraint they were working under. These examples don't constitute breakthroughs in pedagogy, but they were fun to devise, and the pupils seemed to enjoy the challenge too, which is half the battle. And then finally, number 5, we can use AI as a rapid prototype creator. Once we've got an idea, it can be difficult as a creative to overcome what I've heard referred to as the tyranny of the blank page or the tyranny of the blank canvas. How do we get started? It can seem overwhelming. How often have we heard pupils mouth the phrase, "I don't know how to start"? Procrastination is often just a behaviour which masks the fear of getting things wrong. And AI does that superbly well. You might ask it to generate a suggested essay outline, provide 5 starter sentences for the opening paragraph, a quick and dirty lesson plan on a particular topic. And you might end up throwing away all of that content and replacing it with more refined ideas that you're happier with. And that's okay, because this is just about overcoming the inertia that can hamper the creative process. So there we have it. A wide-ranging conversation today, and no doubt a topic I'll return to at some point in the future. Thank you for listening. I hope you found some useful takeaways from the episode. Please spread the word if you think others would enjoy the show. And don't forget to check out the AI Academia YouTube channel for practical tutorials on using AI tools in education. Have a great week, and I look forward to catching up again soon.